Not medium, not rare. If it bleeds, I'm sending it back. If it's gray, I'm sending it back. Got it, sweetheart? Mr. Henderson's voice, a gravelly rasp. Esther just smiled, another soul-crushing Tuesday at the Astor Diner. Little did he know, as he preened for his date, that she understood every disdainful syllable he uttered. Years in Paris had taught her more than just how to perfectly poach an egg. Tonight something was different. A tension, a silent hum. And the secret she carried, the fluency he mocked, was about to become her weapon. This isn't about a spoiled steak. This is about a quiet act of rebellion, about a woman reclaiming a life stolen by circumstance. They think she's just a waitress. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. Not medium, not rare. If it bleeds, I'm sending it back. If it's gray, I'm sending it back. Got it, sweetheart? Mr. Henderson's voice, a gravelly rasp. Esther just smiled. Another soul-crushing Tuesday at the Astor Diner. Little did he know, as he preened for his date, that she understood every disdainful syllable he uttered. Years in Paris had taught her more than just how to perfectly poach an egg. Tonight something was different. A tension, a silent hum, and the secret she carried, the fluency he mocked, was about to become her weapon. This isn't about a spoiled steak. This is about a quiet act of rebellion, about a woman reclaiming a life stolen by circumstance. They think she's just a waitress. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. The scent of cheap coffee grounds clinging to everything hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of Esther's reality. The Astor Diner on Manhattan's Upper East Side was a far cry from the cafes lining the Seine. Here, dreams went to die alongside day-old pastries and lukewarm soup. At 26, Esther Beaumont was acutely aware that she was one of those fading dreams. She tied the frayed strings of her apron a little tighter, the familiar ritual a shield against the drudgery to come. A practiced smile stretched across her lips, one that rarely reached the sadness in her eyes. She was efficient, unobtrusive, the perfect ghost gliding between demanding customers and impatient cooks. No one here suspected that beneath the worn uniform beat the heart of a scholar, a student who could effortlessly deconstruct a Picasso or recite Verlaine from memory. 4 years ago, Paris had been her oyster. A scholarship to the Sorbonne, a sun-drenched studio overlooking the Luxembourg Gardens, the intoxicating thrill of intellectual discovery. Then the phone rang, her father's failing health, his collapsing business, the avalanche of debt threatening to bury her family. The dream fractured, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. She traded cobblestone streets for cracked pavement, existential debates for double shifts, and the vibrant hues of Parisian life for the monochrome monotony of New York. "Order up!" Saul the cook bellowed, his voice a volcanic eruption amidst the sizzle of bacon and the clang of pans. Esther automatically reached for the steaming plates, the heat a familiar burn on her skin. "Thanks, S." She navigated the crowded diner with practiced ease. Table 7. Henderson, her personal Tuesday tormentor. He was a man in a power suit, slicked back hair, and an insatiable need to prove his importance to his obviously bored date. He'd already rejected the orange juice and sent the soup back for being tepid. He'd made it abundantly clear that the steak, when it arrived, had to be cooked precisely to his impossible specifications. Earlier, he said to her, snapping his fingers for the third time, and Esther had just smiled, offering another refill of his sparkling water. "Perfectly clear, sir." But as she weaved through the tables, a different presence caught her eye. A man sat alone in a corner booth. He was an anomaly in the Astor's usual cast of characters. No frantic phone calls, no desperate attempts to be noticed, just quiet observation. His clothes were understated, a dark cashmere sweater, charcoal trousers, but spoke of quality. No flashy watch, no ostentatious display, just an air of quiet authority. He nursed a single black coffee, his gaze following her with an intensity that wasn't lecherous, but rather assessing. A writer, perhaps? A professor? Something about him hinted at a world far removed from this greasy spoon purgatory. "2 more coffees for table 9, Maya," another waitress murmured as they passed. "And Henderson is asking for you again. He says his water tastes too Municipal. Esther sighed. Of course it does. I'll get the bottled water. Just another Tuesday, an endless cycle of mundane tasks punctuated by the subtle and not so subtle condescension of the privilege. Little did she know that this Tuesday was poised to detonate, cleaving her life in two. Back in his corner booth, the man took a slow sip of his coffee, his gaze fixed on Esther. It wasn't just a waitress he was watching, it was a potential waiting to be unleashed. The bell above the door jingled, announcing a new arrival. An elderly woman, her face etched with confusion, stepped inside. She clutched a large handbag, her eyes darting around the diner like a frightened bird. Her clothes were elegant, though slightly rumpled, a classic trench coat over a silk scarf, suggesting a tourist hopelessly lost. She approached the host stand, where Kevin, the perpetually flustered teenager, was struggling with the seating chart. "A table, s'il vous plaît?" she asked, her English heavily accented and hesitant. Kevin stared blankly. "A what table?" "For one. S'il vous plaît?" Her voice trembled slightly. Yeah, hold on," Kevin mumbled, his eyes glued to his list. The woman tried again, launching into a rapid-fire stream of French, explaining her predicament. Lost dead phone battery, supposed to meet her tour group at the Met, mistakenly went to Guggenheim. Kevin just shook his head. "Sorry, lady, I don't speak whatever that is." "Spanish?" From his table, Henderson let out a theatrical sigh. "Oh, for heaven's sake, let a man of culture handle this." He pushed back his chair and approached the woman, puffing out his chest. "Bonjour, madame," he said, his accent a mangled parody of the French language. I can help you. You, want a table? Voulez-vous, sit down?" He gestured wildly at an empty table. Esther, delivering a basket of bread nearby, winced. Henderson was butchering the language, transforming its inherent beauty into a clumsy, offensive caricature. It was more than just his atrocious French, though. It was his arrogance, the smug superiority he exuded as he made a spectacle of this vulnerable woman. It was the same condescension he displayed toward her all afternoon. Something snapped. The buried memories of sun-drenched afternoons spent in the Jardin des Plantes, debating Foucault, the very core of who she was before circumstance stole her dreams, surged to the surface. She placed the bread basket on the table, wiped her hands on her apron, and approached the elderly woman. From his corner booth, Alexander Sterling leaned forward almost imperceptibly, his coffee cup poised halfway to his lips. Esther smiled gently at the woman, then spoke, the words flowing effortlessly from her lips. The voice that emerged wasn't the flat, weary drone of a New York waitress. It was a voice from another life, clear and vibrant, as smooth as polished jade. "Madam," she began, her Parisian accent flawless. "Pardonnez-moi, madame, for the interruption. This man does not understand you. Puis-je vous aider? Vous semblez perdu." The diner seemed to fall silent. Henderson's jaw slackened. His date stared with wide, disbelieving eyes. Saul poked his head out from the kitchen window, his eyebrows raised in surprise. The French woman's face, however, lit up with profound relief. "Oh, monsieur, merci," she exclaimed, her hand flying to her chest. She launched into her story again, the words tumbling out in a torrent of gratitude. She explained her confusion about the museums, her dead phone, her fear of missing her tour group. Esther listened patiently, offering soothing words. "Madame Dubois," she said reassuringly, "ne vous inquiétez pas, madame. Tout ira bien." She turned to Kevin. "Kevin, can you seat this lady at table 12, please, and bring her a glass of water and a menu?" Then turning back to Madame Dubois, "Please, have a seat. Let me use my phone to call your tour guide. What is the name of the company?" While Madame Dubois fumbled in her purse for the tour company's brochure, Esther turned to face Henderson. His face was a mottled shade of red, a volatile mixture of fury and humiliation. "If you'll excuse me, sir," Esther said, her voice reverting to its polite professional tone. "I'll get you that bottled water now." She didn't wait for a reply. She retrieved her phone from her locker, made a quick call, and sorted out Madame Dubois' predicament. The tour bus was waiting for another hour. She gave the woman clear, written directions to a taxi stand just a block away. Madame Dubois was effusive in her gratitude, pressing a crumpled $20 bill into Esther's hand, which Esther gently refused. Bon voyage, madame. It's my pleasure. Have a safe trip. As Madame Dubois left, a quiet sense of satisfaction settled over Esther. For the first time in years, she felt like herself again. She had forgotten what that felt like. She went to clear Henderson's table, expecting him to be gone. He was, but he'd left a paltry $1 tip on a $100 bill. She wasn't surprised. What did surprise her was that the man in the corner booth was also getting up to leave. He caught her eye as he slid on a tailored navy blue coat. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a look of profound appraisal in his eyes. He left a crisp $100 bill on his table for a $3 coffee and walked out without a word. Esther pocketed the generous tip, feeling a small thrill of victory. She thought that was the end of it, a brief, satisfying moment of rebellion in an otherwise gray existence. She had no idea it was only the beginning. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of routine. The diner emptied out, the frantic energy of the lunch rush replaced by the quiet hum of the late afternoon. Esther refilled salt shakers, wiped down sticky ketchup bottles, and tried not to think about Henderson's sneer or the surprising weight of the quiet man's gaze. She was just Esther, the waitress. The flicker of the Sorbonne student had been just that, a flicker. When her shift finally ended at 5:01 p.m., she felt the familiar ache in her feet and the deeper ache in her soul. She slung her worn messenger bag over her shoulder and headed for the back exit. "Hey, Beaumont!" She turned. It was Saul, wiping his hands on his greasy apron. He was holding something, a sleek black envelope. "The quiet guy, the one in the corner booth. He came back a few minutes ago, said he forgot to give this to you. Told me to make sure you got it personally." Esther frowned, taking the envelope. It was made of heavy, expensive cardstock, unlike anything she'd ever held. There was no name on it, no address, just a simple, elegant silver seal holding it closed. The stylized wings of what looked like a falcon. "Weird, right?" Saul grunted. "Looked like a spy or something. Anyway, see you tomorrow." Esther murmured her thanks and slipped out into the alley. The evening air was cool against her flushed skin. Leaning against the brick wall under the dim glow of a security light, she broke the seal. Her fingers trembled slightly. Inside were two items. The first was a business card, as thick and black as the envelope. The silver falcon crest was embossed at the top. Below it, in minimalist silver lettering, were a name and a title. Alexander Sterling, CEO, Sterling Innovations. Esther's breath caught in her throat. Sterling Innovations wasn't just some tech company. It was a global titan, a behemoth in aerospace, logistics, and cutting-edge AI. Alexander Sterling was a legend, a reclusive genius who had built an empire from scratch. He was a billionaire many times over, famously private and rarely photographed. That was the quiet man from the diner. It seemed impossible. The second item made her heart stop altogether. It was a plane ticket, or rather a reservation confirmation, for a private jet, a Gulfstream G650, scheduled to depart from Teterboro Airport in New Jersey the next day at noon. The destination, Le Bourget Airport, Paris. The passenger's name, Esther Beaumont. Tucked into the fold of the ticket was a small handwritten note on matching black stationery. The handwriting was sharp and decisive, a bold, forward-slanting script in silver ink. "Miss Beaumont, talent should never be wasted on serving mediocrity. A voice like yours belongs in Paris, not in a diner arguing over bottled water. A car will be waiting for you at your address tomorrow at 10:01 a.m. Your seat will be waiting. This is not a request. It's an opportunity. A.S." Esther read the note once, then twice, then a third time. Her mind reeled. The alley seemed to tilt, the sounds of the city fading into a dull roar. This had to be a joke, an elaborate, cruel prank. Maybe Henderson had set it up to mock her further. But how would he know her address? And the expense? A private jet to Paris? She stumbled home in a daze, the black envelope clutched in her hand like a talisman. When she burst into her tiny queen's apartment, Maya was on the couch, scrolling through her phone while a reality TV show blared in the background. "Whoa, you look like you've seen a ghost," Maya said, looking up. Esther didn't speak. She just walked over and laid the contents of the envelope on the coffee table. The business card, the jet ticket, the note. Maya picked up the card. Sterling Innovations? Isn't that? Her eyes widened. She read the note, then looked at the ticket. She looked back at Esther, her mouth agape. Esther, what is this? I don't know, Esther whispered, sinking onto the couch. It's insane. He was there at the diner, the guy I told you about, who left the $100 tip. Maya's initial shock quickly morphed into deep-seated suspicion. She was a paralegal, pragmatic and protective by nature. Okay, hold on. A strange billionaire leaves you a private jet ticket to Paris, Esther? This is every red flag in the book. This is how horror movies start. Human trafficking, a weird cult, some kind of creepy, pretty woman fantasy. You cannot be serious. I know, Esther said, running a hand through her hair. It's crazy, but the note. Talent should never be wasted. He heard you speak French. Maya countered, standing up and pacing the small living room. That's it. For all you know, this guy has some bizarre fetish. Esther, you don't know anything about him. He's Alexander Sterling, Esther said quietly. He's one of the most famous businessmen in the world. He's not some random creep. Rich people can be the biggest creeps of all, Maya shot back. And how did he get your address? That's not just observant. That's investigative. It's stalker-level stuff. The question hung in the air, heavy and unnerving. How did he know where she lived? Esther's mind raced. He must have had someone follow her or run her name through a database. The ease with which he had pierced the veil of her anonymity was terrifying. But beneath the fear, something else was stirring. A wild, dangerous hope. Paris. The word alone was a physical ache in her chest. The ticket on the table wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a doorway back to the life that had been stolen from her. It was a chance. It was everything. What if it's real? Esther asked, her voice barely a whisper. What if it's just an opportunity, like he said? And what if it's a trap? Maya retorted, her arms crossed. You throw away your job, your life here, on the whim of a man you met for 5 seconds? For a cryptic note? Be realistic. Esther looked around the cramped apartment at the peeling paint on the walls, the stack of overdue bills on the counter. She thought of her uniform hanging by the door, smelling of grease. This was her reality. It was safe, predictable, and it was slowly suffocating her. The note said, "This is not a request." It felt like a command, but also a challenge. A challenge to be more than what she had become. The fear was real. Maya's warnings were logical, but the pull of Paris, the intoxicating possibility of escape, was stronger. It was the most terrifying decision of her life. She looked at Maya, her oldest friend, her anchor in this difficult life. I think I have to go, Esther said, the words tasting strange and foreign on her tongue. I have to know. The next morning was a whirlwind of anxiety and adrenaline. Esther called the diner and quit, her voice shaking as she left a message for her manager, Mr. Davies. She imagined his annoyance, his casual dismissal of her as just another flaky waitress. The thought, which would have bothered her yesterday, felt strangely liberating today. Packing was a surreal experience. What does one pack for a clandestine trip to Paris, offered by a reclusive billionaire? Her entire wardrobe consisted of worn jeans, faded t-shirts, and a single black dress she'd owned for 5 years. She stuffed them into her old scuffed suitcase, feeling foolish and hopelessly out of her depth. Maya watched her, a storm of worry on her face. I ran a background check on him, or tried to. He's a ghost. No scandals, no tabloid fodder, just business articles and philanthropy announcements. He's either a saint or very, very good at hiding things. Maybe he's just private, Esther said, trying to convince herself as much as Maya. Private people don't summon waitresses to Paris with anonymous notes, Maya shot back. I'm serious, Esther. I've put a tracking app on your phone. Don't you dare turn it off. And I want you to check in with me every 3 hours. If I don't hear from you, I'm calling the embassy, the FBI, the CIA. I swear to God. Esther hugged her friend tightly, grateful for her fierce loyalty. I'll be careful, I promise. At precisely 10:00 a.m., a black Mercedes-Benz S-Class sedan, so silent it seemed to materialize out of thin air, pulled up to their apartment building. A chauffeur in a crisp black suit stepped out and opened the rear door. He didn't ask for her name. He simply nodded and said, "Miss Beaumont, we are ready when you are." The ride to Teterboro Airport was silent and smooth. Esther stared out the tinted windows at the city rushing by, feeling a profound sense of detachment, as if she were watching a movie of someone else's life. They didn't go to the main terminal, but to a private executive hangar. There, gleaming on the tarmac, was the Gulfstream G650. It was a vision of power and grace, larger and more imposing than she could have ever imagined. A flight attendant, with a warm smile, greeted her at the steps. "Welcome aboard, Miss Beaumont. Mr. Sterling has arranged everything for your comfort. May I take your bag?" The interior of the jet was a study in understated luxury. Cream leather seats, polished mahogany wood, and subtle silver accents that echoed the Falcon crest. It was more like a flying luxury apartment than an airplane. She was the only passenger. As the jet taxied down the runway, Esther's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the point of no return. The engines roared and the plane surged forward with incredible force, pressing her back into her plush seat. Within moments, they were airborne, climbing steeply into the clouds. Below her, New York City shrank. The diner, her apartment, her old life, all of it vanishing into a haze. She was untethered, suspended between the world she knew and a future that was a complete and terrifying unknown. The flight attendant served her a lunch that was better than any meal she had ever served at the Astor Diner. Poached salmon, asparagus with hollandaise, and a glass of champagne that fizzed like liquid stars on her tongue. It all felt like a dream. She half expected to wake up to the sound of her alarm clock in her tiny queen's bedroom. But 7 hours later, the dream continued. As the jet began its descent, the lights of Paris emerged from the darkness below, a glittering carpet of gold and silver. The Eiffel Tower, lit up in its nightly spectacle, pierced the sky like a diamond needle. A lump formed in Esther's throat. She was back. After 4 years of yearning, she was finally back. They landed at Le Bourget, the private airport north of the city. There was no customs line, no baggage claim, no chaos. She was escorted from the plane directly to another waiting car, another silent chauffeur. They drove through the streets of Paris, past familiar landmarks that made her heart ache with a bittersweet nostalgia. The Arc de Triomphe, the Champs-Élysées. It was all as beautiful as she remembered. The car, however, didn't stop at a hotel. It pulled up to a set of imposing wrought iron gates that opened onto a private, tree-lined cobblestone drive. At the end of it stood a magnificent Hotel Particulier, a grand private Parisian mansion in the 16th arrondissement. It was a palace of limestone and slate, its windows glowing warmly in the night. The chauffeur opened her door. "Welcome to Mr. Sterling's Parisian residence, Miss Beaumont." Her legs felt weak as she walked up the stone steps. The massive oak door swung open before she could touch it. Standing in the grand marble-floored foyer was Alexander Sterling. He was dressed in a simple dark sweater and trousers, just as he had been in the diner. Up close, she could see the faint lines of fatigue around his sharp, intelligent eyes. He was younger than she'd thought, perhaps in his late 30s. "Miss Beaumont," he said, his voice a calm, low baritone. "Welcome to Paris. I trust your flight was comfortable." Was comfortable. "Yes, thank you," she stammered, feeling small and out of place in the cavernous hall with its soaring ceilings and priceless-looking art. "Mr. Sterling, I don't understand any of this." "I know," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Clarity is the purpose of your visit, but first, you must be exhausted. My housekeeper will show you to your room. We can talk in the morning." He gestured and a woman in a gray uniform appeared. As Esther followed her up a sweeping staircase, she glanced back. Alexander Sterling was watching her with the same unreadable, analytical expression he'd had in the diner. He hadn't explained a thing. The mystery, she realized, was only getting deeper. This was not a gift. It was a prelude. Esther awoke to the unfamiliar sensation of sleeping on sheets with a thread count higher than her monthly rent. Sunlight streamed through tall French windows, illuminating a bedroom that was larger than her entire queen's apartment. It was exquisitely decorated in shades of cream and soft gray, with a small marble fireplace and a private balcony overlooking a manicured garden. A fresh kvass and a cup of coffee were already waiting for her on a small table. It was a beautiful cage, and she was still a prisoner of confusion. After dressing in her one good black dress, which now felt woefully inadequate, she made her way downstairs. She found Alexander Sterling in a vast book-lined study, reviewing documents on a sleek, transparent tablet. He looked up as she entered, gesturing for her to sit in one of the leather armchairs opposite his large desk. "Good morning," he said. "Please have a seat, Mr. Sterling." She began, her voice firmer than she expected. "I appreciate the flight and the accommodations, but I need to know why I'm here. This is abnormal. Direct." "I appreciate that," he said, setting his tablet aside and giving her his full attention. "You are here, Miss Beaumont, because I am in need of a very specific skill set. A skill set I believe you possess, despite your current employment." Before he could elaborate the study, doors opened. A woman entered, her heels clicking decisively on the polished parquet floor. She was tall, impossibly chic, and radiated an aura of intimidating authority. She wore a perfectly tailored Christian Dior suit, and her dark hair was pulled back in a severe shiny. Her eyes, the same piercing gray as Alexander's, swept over Esther with a cool, dismissive glance. "Alexander, you're late for the Leffy preliminary," she said, her voice crisp and laced with an accent that was a hybrid of British boarding school and American corporate law. She stopped and looked at Esther again, a flicker of annoyance crossing her features. "Is this her?" "The waitress?" Alexander's face remained impassive. "Esther Beaumont. This is my sister, Isabel Sterling. She's the Chief Operating Officer of Sterling Innovations. Isabel, this is Miss Beaumont." Isabel offered a smile that was as sharp and cold as a shard of glass. "A pleasure, though I confess I don't quite understand the purpose of this experiment, Alexander." She turned her gaze back to Esther. "My brother has a pant for seeing potential in the most unlikely of places. He seems to think that because you can speak French, you can solve a multi-billion-dollar problem for us." Esther's head was spinning. Our multi-billion-dollar problem. What did they think she was? Alexander finally offered an explanation. "Sterling Innovations is in the final stages of acquiring a company, a French company, Maison Lefebvre." Esther knew the name. Everyone did. Maison Lefebvre was a legendary Parisian luxury house founded in the 18th century. They were famous for their bespoke leather goods and perfumes, a bastion of old-world craftsmanship and French heritage. "Lefebvre is family-owned," Alexander continued. "It has been for 8 generations, and the current matriarch Geneviève Lev is resistant to the acquisition. She is a traditionalist. She believes an American tech company like ours will destroy her family's legacy. We've sent teams of the best lawyers and negotiators in the world, and they've all failed. They don't speak her language." "And I don't mean French," Isabel interjected, her tone dripping with skepticism. "They don't speak the language of the nuance of culture, of respect for tradition." Geneviève Lefebvre slammed the door on our last M&A head because he wore white sneakers to a meeting. Esther was beginning to understand. "You need a translator." "No," Alexander said, leaning forward. "We have hundreds of translators. I need more than that. I need a bridge. I need someone who understands the subtlety of French culture, who can show respect for their heritage, but who also understands the directness and ambition of the American mindset. Someone who can navigate both worlds." He paused, his eyes locking onto hers. "In the diner, I didn't just see a waitress speaking French. I saw a woman of intelligence and grace handle a difficult, arrogant man with poise. Then I saw her treat a lost, frightened woman with compassion and empathy, using flawless, colloquial French. Not to show off, but to genuinely connect and help. That combination, poise under pressure, cultural fluency, and genuine empathy, is rarer than you can imagine. It cannot be taught in a business school." Isabel let out a quiet, impatient sigh. "It's a romantic notion, Alexander. A lovely story. But this is a $2.7 billion acquisition, not a social experiment. Miss Beaumont has no corporate experience, no background in finance or law. She served pie yesterday. The insult landed like a physical blow, But Esther held her ground. She refused to let this woman diminish her. "And what is it you do exactly when you're not a waitress?" Isabel pressed her eyes, narrowing. "What hidden talents did my brother unearth with his little private investigation?" The question confirmed Esther's fears he had investigated her. "I was a student," Esther said, her voice steady. "Here at the Sorbonne, I studied art history and French cultural studies. I had to leave before I could finish my degree due to a family emergency." Alexander nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he already knew. Isabel, however, looked unimpressed. "So, you're a college dropout," she stated flatly. "My sister lacks a certain subtlety," Alexander said, shooting a warning look at Isabel. "Here is the situation, Miss Beaumont. This is not a vacation. It is for all intents and purposes a job interview. The most unorthodox job interview of your life. I want you to be part of the team meeting with Geneviève Lefebvre and her family. I don't want you to negotiate finances. I want you to listen, to observe, to build a bridge where we have only found walls. And if I succeed," Esther asked, "if you help us secure this deal," Alexander said, "I will create a position for you at this company, Director of Cultural Integration for our European acquisitions. You will have a new life, a salary that will solve any family debt you might have, and a career that utilizes your actual talents. I will also fund the completion of your degree, should you still wish for it." It was an offer that was beyond comprehension, a lifeline, not just to solvency, but to a life she thought was lost forever. "And if I fail," Isabel answered before Alexander could. "If you fail, Miss Beaumont, a car will take you back to labor, and you will be on the next flight back to New York. You can have your old job back at the diner. We will, of course, compensate you for your time." Her tone made it clear that failure was the only outcome she expected. The weight of their expectations of the entire surreal situation pressed down on Esther. This was insane. They were asking her to step into a corporate shark tank with nothing but a half-finished arts degree and her fluency in French. It was an impossible task. But then she thought of the diner, the grease, the condescension, the slow grinding death of her spirit. Failure here meant returning to that. Success meant everything. She looked from Isabel's cold, challenging stare to Alexander's quiet, expectant one. She took a deep breath. "When is the meeting?" she asked. The next 2 days were a brutal high-speed education in the world of corporate acquisitions. Esther was given an office in Sterling's Parisian headquarters on the Place Vendôme, a space with a view that was probably worth more than she had earned in her entire life. She was buried under an avalanche of files, financial reports, market analyses, legal documents, and most importantly, a thick dossier on Geneviève Lefebvre and her family. She devoured every page. She learned that Geneviève was 78 years old, a widow, and had run the company with an iron fist for 40 years. She was a legend in the fashion world, a purist who despised the modern trends of fast fashion and influencer marketing. The dossier was filled with failed attempts by other companies to acquire Maison Lefebvre. Geneviève had dismissed them all as vulgar merchants who wouldn't know a Birkin from a bucket. Isabel made her disdain for the situation clear. She would periodically enter Esther's office, quiz her on obscure financial data, and point out her lack of experience. "Do you even know what EBITDA means, Miss Beaumont?" She'd ask, a smug look on her face. "No," Esther admitted honestly. "But I know that Madame Lefebvre's favorite artist is Jean-Honoré Fragonard, that she believes the soul of her company resides in the specific stitching technique developed by her great-grandfather, and that she sees this deal not as a financial transaction, but as the potential orphanage of her family's legacy. Perhaps that is more important than earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization." The response left Isabel momentarily speechless, which gave Esther a small surge of confidence. She knew she couldn't compete on their turf. She couldn't talk finance or law, but she could understand people. She could understand culture. That had to be her strength. The day of the meeting arrived. Esther was a bundle of nerves. A stylist summoned by Alexander had provided her with a simple, elegant, navy blue dress by a discreet French designer in low heels. Understated, respectful, the stylist had advised. The meeting was to be held at the Lefebvre flagship store on the Rue Saint-Honore, a hallowed space that felt more like a museum than a shop. As their car pulled up, Esther could see a small army of lawyers and executives from Sterling Innovations waiting on the sidewalk, all looking tense. Alexander, Isabel, and Esther got out of the car. Alexander gave Esther a reassuring nod. "Remember, you are not here to speak for me. You are here to listen for me." Isabel simply sniffed. "Try not to spill anything." They entered the building. The air inside was silent and smelled of expensive leather and jasmine. They were led up a private elevator to a formal salon on the top floor, and there, sitting in a Louis Vuitton 16th armchair, was Geneviève Lefebvre. She was a small bird-like woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and perfectly coiffed silver hair. She was flanked by her two sons, both stern-faced men in their 50s. Introductions were made when Esther was introduced as part of our cultural liaison team. Genevieve's eyes lingered on her for a moment, a flicker of curiosity in their depths. The meeting began, and it was a disaster. Isabel, taking the lead, launched into a slick presentation filled with charts and projections about synergy, global market expansion, and shareholder value. She spoke with a cold corporate precision that clearly grated on Madame Lefebvre. The matriarch listened, her face an unreadable mask. After 15 minutes, she held up a delicate, age-potted hand. "Enough, Mademoiselle Sterling," she said, her voice soft, but carrying immense authority. "I have heard these words before. They are empty numbers on a page. You talk of expanding my brand. You speak of it as if it is a chain of coffee shops. You do not understand what we do here. The soul." Isabel's professional smile tightened. "Madame Lefebvre, with all due respect, the soul of a company does not pay its employees or fund its growth in a competitive global market." It was the wrong thing to say. A chill descended upon the room. Madame Lefebvre's son, Antoine, spoke for the first time. "My mother finds your approach aggressive, mademoiselle." The meeting devolved from there. The two sides were speaking different languages, just as Alexander had predicted. The Sterling team talked about efficiency and profit. The Leff family talked about heritage and art. Esther remained silent, watching and listening. She noticed the small details. She saw how Madame Lefebvre's hand rested on a particular leather-bound book on the table beside her. She noticed the painting on the wall behind her. Not a famous masterpiece, but a beautiful, intimate portrait of a woman in 18th century dress. It had the soft, romantic style of Fragonard, the artist mentioned in the dossier. As the meeting was about to end in a complete stalemate, Esther felt a desperate urge to do something. This was her one shot. Alexander caught her eye, and she saw the question in his gaze. He gave her the slightest of nods. "Permission." "Madame Lefebvre," Esther said, her voice quiet but clear. The entire room turned to look at her. "Forgive my interruption." She stood up and walked not toward the negotiating table, but toward the painting on the wall. "This is a beautiful piece," she said, speaking in French. Her accent, so different from the formal textbook French of the translators, seemed to warm the air. "The brushwork is so delicate. It reminds me of Fragonard, but it's more intimate, less theatrical. Is it a family piece?" Geneviève Lefebvre's austere expression softened for the first time. She looked surprised and intrigued. "You have a good eye, mademoiselle. That is a portrait of my great-great-great-grandmother, painted by one of Fragonard's lesser-known students. It is my most treasured possession." "She is reading," Esther observed, looking closer. It was unusual for a woman to be painted reading in that era, unless she was a great intellectual. She must have been a remarkable woman. "She was Madame Lefebvre," said a note of pride in her voice. "She is the one who convinced her husband, a simple saddlemaker, to create the first handbag for Queen Marie Antoinette. She was the true founder of our house, her vision." Isabel was staring at Esther, her mouth slightly open, a look of utter disbelief on her face. The lawyers were shuffling their papers, confused by this sudden turn in conversation. Esther turned from the painting to face Madame Leff. "Mr. Sterling's company is built on technology and data. It is a world of numbers. But he understands that a legacy like yours is not built on numbers. It is built on vision, the vision of a woman like her." She gestured to the portrait. "He does not want to erase that vision. He wants to give it a new voice, to share it with a world she could never have dreamed of." A company without a soul is just a machine. You are the soul of Maison Lev. He is not here to buy a machine. He is here to protect a work of art. She had used the word art. She had connected the present to the past. She had shown that she saw not just a brand but a story. Silence filled the room. Genevieve Lefebvre stared at Esther, her sharp eyes searching. Then she slowly turned her gaze to Alexander Sterling. "Your father was a builder. Was he not Mercier Sterling?" she asked. Alexander, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "He was a carpenter. He taught me that the foundation is everything." Madame Lefebvre nodded slowly. A small, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time. Perhaps we can have tea next week, and you can leave your presentation," she said, gesturing to Isabel's laptop at your office. "Just you and me." And she added, her eyes finding Esther. "You will bring Mademoiselle Beaumont." The walk back to the car was surreal. The Sterling executives were buzzing with excitement, clapping Alexander on the back. For the first time in months, they had made progress. They had a second meeting. Isabel was silent, her expression a thunderous mix of shock and resentment. As they got into the car, she finally turned to Esther. "That was a lucky trick," she said, her voice low and sharp. "A parlor game with an old painting." "It wasn't a trick, Isabel," Alexander said, his voice firm. He looked at Esther, and for the first time she saw open admiration in his eyes. It was insight. She listened. "Something your team of experts failed to do. She found the foundation." Isabel said nothing more for the rest of the ride, simply staring out the window, defeated. The tea with Madame Lefebvre the following week was a resounding success. Without the lawyers and presentations, the conversation flowed easily. Esther acted as the bridge, just as Alexander had hoped. She would translate not just their words but their intent. When Alexander spoke of platforms and digital ecosystems, Esther would rephrase it to Madame Lefebvre as creating a digital atelier where the stories of the artisans could be shared with the world. They talked for hours, not about money, but about art history and legacy. By the end of the week, the deal was signed. Maison Lev was now part of Sterling Innovations, but with contractual guarantees protecting its heritage, its French workshops, and with Genevieve Lefebvre herself appointed to a lifetime seat on the board as a brand guardian. The night the deal was finalized, Alexander hosted a small celebration at his mansion. Esther stood on the balcony of her room, the same one she had woken up in just over a week ago, looking out at the twinkling lights of Paris. She felt like a completely different person from the weary waitress who had stepped off that plane. Alexander came to stand beside her. For a few moments, they stood in comfortable silence. "I owe you a great deal, Esther," he said finally. "You gave me an opportunity," she replied. "That's more than anyone else ever has." "The offer I made is on the table," he said, turning to face her. "Director of Cultural Integration, a very generous salary, a housing allowance here in Paris, and a blank check for your education. It's yours. No interview required." This was it, the culmination of the impossible dream, a new life handed to her on a silver platter. But something had shifted in her over the past week. She had not just been acting as a bridge for him. She had been rebuilding a bridge to her own forgotten self. "Thank you," she said, her heart pounding. "It's an incredible offer. But I have a counter-proposal." Alexander raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "I'm listening." "I don't want the job as a gift," she said. "And I don't want you to pay for my degree. I want you to invest in me. Not as an employee you discovered, but as a partner you value." She took a breath, summoning all the confidence she had gained. "I want to run the Maison Lefebvre integration, not as a director of a department, but as the project lead. Give me a budget and a team, and I want a performance-based contract. If I succeed in doubling its digital presence while maintaining brand integrity in 2 years, I get a stake in the subsidiary. A small one, but a real one. And I'll pay for my own degree with the salary you give me." She was asking for responsibility, not a reward. She was asking for a chance to build something herself, not just be a well-paid accessory to his empire. Alexander Sterling stared at her, his analytical gaze replaced by one of genuine surprise, which slowly morphed into a broad, brilliant smile. It was the first time she had seen him truly smile, and it transformed his face. "A college dropout waitress who served me coffee a week ago is now negotiating equity with me on a multi-billion-dollar deal, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. He let out a soft laugh. I knew my instincts were right about you, Esther Beaumont. I just had no idea how right. He extended his hand. You have a deal. Welcome to Sterling Innovations. Esther shook his hand, a current of electricity passing between them. It wasn't just a handshake. It was a contract. It was the closing of one chapter of her life and the explosive beginning of another. She was no longer a waitress who spoke French. She was a woman who had found her voice in more ways than one, and she was finally truly home. Esther's story isn't just about a lucky break. It's a powerful reminder that the person you are right now in whatever job you're working is not the final chapter. Your hidden talents, your forgotten passions, the skills you think no one sees, they have immense value. It was a single moment of kindness and a sentence in French that changed Esther's life. But it was her courage to step onto that jet, her intelligence to see the real problem, and her confidence to demand her true worth that secured her future. What hidden talent do you have that the world just hasn't seen yet? What would you have done if you found that black envelope? If this story inspired you or made you think, please give this video a thumbs up. It truly helps us bring more stories like this to you. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an incredible journey. And share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that their big break might be just one customer, one conversation, or one moment of courage away. Thank you for listening.